You're listening to Two Babies in a Business, a podcast about babies, business, life, and many other things. Welcome to the show today. Actually, Christina isn't joining me today, so I have half of the business, and I have Emily, our podcast producer and our wonderful staff person here at CIPR Communications. So we're doing a little bit of a special episode today because Emily said, "Hey, you know what? You once told me that sales is like dating." And so we thought, hey, let's talk about that. That sounds like a fun topic. So, Emily, why don't you give some context to maybe that conversation and how it led to here today?
Yeah, I'll be completely candid. So you had posted, we had gotten some new sales and that was super exciting. So I responded to your Instagram story, I think it was, and I said, teach me your ways. And so you sent me this reply that was like, sales is a little bit like dating, you have to know when to engage and then when to leave them alone. And like I said, I'll be totally candid. That one kind of hit me right in the feels that day when you sent it. But I've definitely come back to it, when I've been considering the sales approach many, many times. And looking back, I think it's very true for both sales and dating. You kind of have to know when to push a little, when to come back and let the other person kind of, I guess, almost like miss you is what it is. Like you want them to think about you and go, oh my gosh, I should talk to that CIPR communications. I should reach out to that Emily again. So I think it's very astute. I did want to ask you though, Peter, about the leads process, because I think a lot of people, whether they're new to sales, whether they're, a seasoned veteran to sales, I think the leads process is probably one that is probably the hardest piece, is just finding those leads, reaching out to them. I have my perspective on where people should get started, but I'd love to hear what yours is first.
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, certainly generating leads is obviously a huge part of what we do at CIPR Communications, but it really depends on the industry you're in, and it depends on how complicated your industry is and sort of what the mechanisms are available in your industry. So, I'll kind of frame it this way and say, there's a couple ways to generate leads. Obviously, you can do things like run ads on Google. You can be really good at search engine optimization. And that works great in a lot of industries. Obviously, business to consumer, where there's a large number of people looking for a service or a product. I think that's a really effective way of doing things. It can also work in business to business, but I think it depends, I guess, on the industry. Depends how competitive the industry is online. So if the industry is really competitive online, then it becomes more difficult. So in our case, obviously, we're a digital marketing agency that does SEO and does digital ads. And so guess what? So do all of our competitors. So it's actually super, super hard to rank really well on Google for certain keywords because that's literally what all of us do. We're getting there. CIPR has made some investments in that front, and we're definitely starting to see the fruits of that. So, we do well. Interestingly, we do much better in keywords related to public relations because I feel like the PR industry isn't as good at that as the digital marketing industry. So, when it comes to SEO and website development and those digital marketing keywords, much more difficult because a lot more competitive. So that's certainly one method. So that's one, what I would call inbound method. And then really the outbound methods, and so these are all just things that we've all done at CIPR Communications, is, for example, cold calling. Cold calling, in our industry actually is surprisingly effective. We early on actually got a lot of leads and sales through cold calls. The other one that we use now, we're currently doing a campaign on, and we've used in the past, is LinkedIn lead generation. So that's really the process of reaching out to a very targeted audience, targeted persona, and then obviously connecting with them, and then a few days later sending a message, some kind of salesy, not really salesy message, but a bit more of an introductory message. This is kind of who I am and what I do. You want to get a coffee at some point, and then there's a series of messages that go out to try to they missed you the first time. It's a little follow up, all that kind of stuff. So that process actually involves a combination of LinkedIn and email outreach. So that's certainly another method. But really, I think the real method that is the one that really works the best is networking, getting out there and speaking in front of an audience, building a brand and being somebody, like attracting people to you. And I feel like from, I guess maybe if we can kind of now talk about how that sort of relates to the dating scene, is obviously that's getting out, being social, hanging out with friends, like putting yourself in situations where maybe you might catch their eye, right? As opposed to sort of sitting in your home and being like, why doesn't anybody want to date me, right? So
Totally.
so I guess that's, yeah. I mean, there's certainly other methods in terms of lead generation. What I will just say quickly, because I know a little bit of context for this conversation also is Emily is also now starting to spend a little bit of her time at CIPR Communications doing sales as well. And so as newly minted salesperson, certainly the starting point I think for anybody that's starting in sales is your own personal network. So who do you know? Reach out to them, get on the phone, ask them who they know, right? So it's a bit of, I guess, a combination of that networking and that LinkedIn lead generation with a bit of a personal touch, right? So that's, I think, where all salespeople unfortunately have to start and cut their teeth. But then once you kind of exhaust, obviously, those avenues, then maybe you go to Tinder or, I mean, LinkedIn or whatever other app is out there where you might be able to find people.
Yeah, I think I was going to say that your network is probably where you want to start as well. Kind of got that sense from you, so that's kind of where I've been starting. But also I've found, to your point about, the dating, but also the sales side of getting out and networking and putting yourself out there. Before I say this, I will preface this by saying don't go to networking events to try and date people, but it will, I mean, it won't, I'm not making promises here, but it could happen, right? When I would say that I personally, we both come from a political background, but I would say personally, a large portion of my network is actually from politics.
As
And
is mine.
yeah, right. Ironically, I was going to say, I've had my history of dating in politics. I don't know if that's for me anymore, but we won't get into that on this podcast. But that's also how you met Christina, is
Right.
through
Totally.
politics. So all that to say is that, those networking events, I'm not promising anything. You may not find your life partner if you go out and network, nor should you go in with that goal, in my opinion. But it could happen, right? If you put yourself out there, maybe you make a sale, maybe you just make a new friend, or
Which
maybe
is also valuable. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Or maybe you do find a life partner. And honestly, I think what I would say, if I could give any advice to anyone who, maybe you're in the sales game or maybe you're just trying to network. Honestly, I think your goal, rather than I'm looking for, business connections, that's fine if that's your goal. Or even, rather your goal is I want to make a sale. I would honestly go into networking with the goal of I want to make a friend,
Totally.
because then I mean, maybe it's the extrovert in me, but I personally think that's a better way of approaching networking, because then there's less pressure of like, what am I going to get out of this, event or connection or whatever. And then, you really do just have a positive output from whatever this is, regardless of necessarily the other expectations that you might be putting on something like this. So network to make friends is my advice to
Yeah, yeah.
people.
And I'd say just to add to that, and this is really where it starts to apply to sales, and this is really, I think, from a sales perspective and a dating perspective, probably the most important thing is, go to the event with the attitude and mindset of just being curious and just you're going to meet people. You never know who you're going to meet. You never know what that person's going to be in your life and how they may benefit you or not benefit you. Maybe you'll never talk to them again, whatever it is. If you're just curious, instead of, so, even on LinkedIn, even when you're doing LinkedIn generation, lead generation, it's the same concept. You don't go to LinkedIn and be like, hey, I'm Peter, here's my credit, here's my business card, here's all my services, here's
Totally.
my pricing, you want to talk. It's like, no, it's like, hey, listen, I do sales or I do marketing for the tourism industry. Like, what are you finding out there? What's going on? Like, how are you finding the market? You got to
That's
just be curious, and curiosity, I think, ultimately is kind of what takes people's guard down, right? And then allows you to actually come together and have a fruitful conversation. Plus people really like talking about themselves, and
just
that's,
gonna say
not
the
a,
same thing.
yeah, it's not a bad thing, it's just the reality. And
Yeah.
so from a psychological perspective is like, let them talk, you never know what you're going to learn, right? So
Totally. And then I think if you can find that common ground, because often we can more often than not find common ground somewhere. Maybe you do make a friend, maybe you do make a sale, but at least you learn something new. That's the other piece of networking that's so, I guess I would say, underrated, just because it doesn't happen nearly as often, but there's that opportunity for mentorship as well, right? So I walk into a room of salespeople and I know what I know, but there's still so much for me to learn. And so then I can ask questions, or maybe I don't even ask questions. Maybe I just listen and tell me, their sage wisdom, and I pick a few things up. I feel like we've been having, on a completely different note, I feel like I've been having some conversations with people through the WSI network who are much more knowledgeable than I am on, website maintenance and hosting. And sometimes I ask the right questions, and sometimes I ask a different question, but I get an answer that still informs me way more than I could have had I not just had any conversation with them. So go to listen, go to learn. This has kind of turned into a why you should network podcast, which I think, that's still probably the basis of where you're going to get started in sales. So
Yeah. Well, and I think bridging back to dating is like, again, if you put yourself out there, you're hanging out with your friends, you all of a sudden, I tell the story about Christina and I, is that like my one good friend Mike Gladstone, I was going through a lot of things in my life. I'm not going to get into the details, but life was not very very good to me at that time, and I was, new to Calgary. I didn't really know many people, and Mike literally just said, "Hey, there's an event happening. It's a political membership drive, and it'd really be cool if you just came out, just come out, and he knew where I was at, I think, and just come out. There's some good people to meet there, and all my favorite peeps are going to be there. Why don't you just come join or whatever?" So I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. So, and I wasn't going to. I was like kind of not feeling 100%, and but I was like, ah, and so I just sort of got over myself and went, and lo and behold, I met my wife, right? So again, it's you never know, and sort of, again, that's a political event or a networking event. So to your point, it's not about necessarily from a dating perspective. That's the kinds of places you need to go to, although maybe, but certainly, just like business, word of mouth and friends of friends, there's always an immediate trust. There's always an immediate sort of, the guards down a little bit. It
yeah,
certainly is a much easier sale, or a much easier, lead to a date about a conversation, a conversation about a date or whatever it is, right? So yeah.
really.
Plus,
Um,
you can get some intel from your friends and learn about the
yeah.
person a little bit, covertly or whatever, right?
It's almost like a safe space, right? Rather than just,
It is.
walking in blind and not really knowing. You
Totally.
describing how that interaction went. They always say about dating, it happens like you find your partner when you least expect it, which is, I think, kind of how that sounds to me, is you weren't necessarily expecting crazy things from that night, but lo and behold,
Yeah.
we've now been with Christina for 10 years.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm just wondering, transferring it the other way. So
Yeah.
dating happens when you least expect it. Do
Yeah.
you think the same is true of sales? Do you usually
Honestly, yes.
when you least expect it? That's hilarious.
Honestly, yes. Yeah. So I've had many times where I tell Christina, it's like, oh, I had this sales call, and I don't think they're gonna go for it, or I don't,
Mm,
whatever. And boom, I got a signed contract. Like, it happens,
um,
maybe not always. There's
yeah,
times where it's like, yeah, we've aligned. Yeah, we're gonna sign this contract. Like, they'll actually be honest with you and tell you and whatever.
yeah,
But there's certainly more times than not where, yeah, it hasn't, felt like, yeah, they're gonna like, it's not gonna be moving forward, or this might take a while, and all of a sudden they're all in, right? So yeah, I definitely see that. So it's interesting, right? And it's, I mean, it's like both dating and sales. It's really sort of a function of understanding human psychology,
yeah,
um, and you know, obviously certain people are the types of people where they don't express a lot of emotions. I was just on a call just earlier, and I wasn't selling services, but I was selling something we're working on to a guy that's, pretty, doesn't react very emotionally to a lot of things. He's very sort of just, but 100% all in with the entire plan I proposed to him, right?
uh-huh.
A little smile at the end, right? Kind of thing. But, so you can't sort of judge a book by its cover. And sometimes, you can't read things the way, I think we all often read people and things and situations through our own lens.
Yeah,
And so we miss the actual truthness of the cues, and we actually miss a lot of things, right? Because our biases are there, right? And so I think in sales, that's, again, really important. And in dating is like, you have some vision of who you want to date and what they need to look like and what kind of job they need to have and this and that. And it's like, you know what? The complete opposite person might be the love of your life that you've always been waiting for. And so
no
gotta
kidding.
keep an open mind.
I think to your point as well about not knowing, kind of not necessarily knowing right away, I guess, how the other person operates. And so using your own perception of how you would act in that situation to inform how you think they should be acting. I think we should all do away with that mindset just right now.
Yes.
But if that's the approach you're coming to the table with, I personally have an anxious attachment style. So if I notice that someone is pulling away, I, when I'm in an unhealthy state, I guess is what I will say, I have that urge to latch on, when really it's like that person may not actually be retreating. They may actually just be taking a beat, thinking about
Right.
it, figuring it out. I have to say that's probably a lot easier for me in sales because it's I know they're just thinking about it and it's all
Right.
good. Whereas in dating, it's
A
a
little
little
less emotion involved. Yeah.
exactly right. So
Yeah.
I think, just giving people the time and space. I think there's this uncertainty and this expectation now, especially with my generation, for that instant gratification where it's like, okay, you haven't outright said that you're in love with me, and that's taking it to the extreme.
Yeah.
But that example. So if you're not outright saying that you're in love with me, you hate me. And
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
no, slow
Yeah.
down.
There's
I
only like 1 million possibilities between those two, between those two things, right?
exactly right. And
Yeah.
like there's obviously a line that you can draw in the sand. Like
Yeah.
with sale too, when you're assessing it or you're assessing this potential relationship, it's like, don't let people rip you around and make you
Sure.
feel confused and that kind of
Yeah.
thing to an extent. But
True.
give them the time, give them the space, let them figure it out. When you really consider it like both sales and dating for
Yeah.
a proper means to an end, it's a considerable investment. So it's
Yeah.
it's not really, and this is something that I think I've learned over the last year. It's probably because my prefrontal cortex is finally developed. So I have all
Yeah.
these
Right.
reasoning skills. But it's something that you really have to consider. Is this the right fit? Is this
Yeah.
sale the right fit? And I think we do a great job of that at CIPR in terms of, making sure that our cultures match
Yeah.
and making sure that that fit is going to be a good one in terms of actual outputs, but also how our team's going to work together well.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think to that point in what you're talking about really to me kind of speaks to kind of being confident in yourself. So in dating and in sales, it's like, hey,
Yeah.
I know what value I bring. I know what value I bring to the table, period. And so if you come to any conversation or situation knowing that, then it's like, hey, if maybe it's not a fit, right? And I'm not gonna give you a 30% discount because you told me my prices are too high. No, I know what value I bring. I'm not gonna get dicked around because you're dicking me around from a dating perspective. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm here for a limited period of time, and if you don't want me, then I'm moving on, right? So, and it's very much like that. And I can say that when I started in sales, especially when you start a new company, it's like just trying to get sales in the door, super eager, super accommodating, whatever it takes. And it's like that desperation is like the exact opposite thing from a sales and dating perspective that anybody could and should do, right? So, eagerness is definitely, not something that works. And unfortunately, it's just obvious. People can tell and it sort of reeks of desperation. And then that's ultimately what's going to sort of sink the deal or sink the deal on the dating side, I guess, right?
No, 100%. I was thinking the same thing. And I think, woo, getting real vulnerable right now. But I think there have been times in my life where I was too, and we've kind of talked about this on the podcast before, but I was too desperate, if you want to use that word, for a relationship, any
Mm-hmm.
relationship, that
Mm-hmm.
it was like people could see that. I think honestly, the biggest thing that is a turn off in that regard is like, that person is not well enough within themselves to actually
Mm-hmm.
bring their best foot to the table. They're not
Totally.
ready. So that other person
Totally.
may still engage with you under the guise of romantic purposes, but
Yeah.
more often than not, you both have different outcomes
Yeah.
intended for that relationship. And so, I think you have to turn inward and kind of look at yourself. And I think it's completely fine if you want a relationship. I don't think there's,
It depends what you want. You got to be right.
yeah,
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting a partner. I think we're very social creatures. We're the
Of
only,
course.
animals on the planet that have come up with this whole society thing. So I think that's very normal. But at the same time, it's about, I think you still need to be picky if you're willing to just go for anybody. And I would say the
Totally.
same thing about sales. If you're willing to just
Exactly.
go for anybody, you're probably
Exactly.
in the right spot to even be doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Or you need to be self-aware because different people are in different situations and different headspaces at different times. And so, hey, maybe you're just looking for a shag and a hookup, and that's okay. And that's maybe where you're at today, right? And that's is
Yeah.
what it is, right? But or if you're looking for something longer term, to your point, then you're looking through a different lens, right? And so similar to sales, it's like, hey, not really what we do, but a quick hourly contract gets you in and out, all good. Slam bam, thank you, ma'am, whatever you want to say. But you know what I'm saying? And versus like we're looking for those really long-term clients that we can grow together with, and we have, all the and it's like a completely different mindset in terms of the sale, in terms of the process, in terms of the whatever, right? The conversations, the all of the things, right? And so, and I don't want to say one or the other is bad,
Yeah.
but I think if you're self-aware of where you're at and what you're looking for, and you're self-confident in who you are, then you can navigate both situations really, really well, right? And I think that's a really important point. And again, you have to really look inward. Am I being desperate
Yeah.
for the sale? Am I being desperate just to hook up with some, like to be with somebody and to have some companion that maybe they'll turn out, maybe they won't, or whatever? Or am I being true to myself and what I actually really want, right? So I think that's a really critical piece to it.
100%. 100%. I think you need to be in the right state of mind for both. If you had told me that we were going to be comparing hourly contracts to hookup culture before we started recording this episode, I would have told you that you were out to lunch. But I do want to give
But
it.
also, before we move on to that, you never know when that hourly contract turns into the best
It's
long-term client
so
you've ever had.
true.
You just
It's
never
so
know.
true.
So, just
Sometimes it's
saying,
worth it. Sometimes it's worth it.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to give a bit of a callback to, no pun intended, to your commentary about cold calling, because I think it's one that lots of people overlook, largely because it's just uncomfortable, whether you're the seller or the sellee. In a lot of cases, we're constantly being sold to in this day and age, and it is what it is. I'm not even going to say it's good or bad. It just is what it is. But I also think it's kind of underrated. I'm going to give a shout out to one of my favorite local businesses here in Calgary, Local Laundry. They found some success a couple months ago. They were trying to find new leads, couldn't figure it out. And so one day they just decided they were going to go the cold calling route and picked up the phone and talked to some of their former customers and said, hey, you haven't ordered in a while, just looking for some feedback. They didn't even say, let's place an order right now over the phone. It was just, why haven't you ordered in a while? What's going on? Can we make our products better, etc.? And they brought in a ton of new business. So I think cold calling can definitely have its benefits.
Definitely. I know many companies that that's their only lead generation source and they swear by it and they've been doing it for years and years and years. And, it's not just a cold call. There's some methodology behind it and how to do it properly and all the stuff, right? But yeah, no, I mean, I can say for our business, it's been a very successful approach, and it depends again, this comes back to where are you at? If you're a brand new business and you have no reputation in the work you do and all the different things, then yeah, probably cold calling is your only option. Maybe you got to get on Tinder and you got to start swiping, right? But obviously, the more you get established and the more you get a reputation and the more your clients are your best champions, then obviously then probably that's a tactic that's less important, right? And now all of a sudden you're mingling with your friends and family, and Prince Charming comes in with his friends and family, and life is
Yeah.
fantastic, right? So right, so it's
Oh.
really back to where are you at and what do you need, right? And so yeah, I think that they're all just factors to consider, right? But I will say about cold calling is that I think from everybody I know who is like a sales executive, like salesperson, came up through sales, came up through like there's companies like Xerox and other sale companies that are really have solid sales training programs. Cold calling, every single one of them had to go through a period in their sales career that involved cold calling, getting on the phone, because that's also a process of dealing with rejection over and over and over and over again and being comfortable with that. And right. And that's just
Oh,
sort of it's like a rite of passage for a salesperson to have to be able
you
to do
know
that.
what though? I feel like on that note of rejection, I feel like probably in sales too, but also in dating, sometimes people take rejection too personally.
Yes.
I mean, from a sales point of view, that's probably a lot easier to just let go because, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting, maybe your business, maybe your service. Probably still doesn't feel great, but it's
Yeah.
not you. And I actually am going to argue that more often than not in dating, it's not you either. But people love to take it personally. And I get it. It feels very personal. I say this
It's
as
very
someone who's
personal.
currently single and has been rejected very many times. Don't get me wrong, but it's not personal, right? Like I would
Yeah.
say 80% of the time when it doesn't work out, it's not necessarily you. It's really more just the situation or
100%, or them or
the,
whatever, right?
yeah,
Like,
like it's like the compatibility thing, right? And it feels personal because
yeah,
sure, it's technically you, but at the same time, it's like, well, we have different values and we don't want the same things in life. And
right.
or we live in a different city or what have you, right? And
Yeah.
it's that. And sometimes it's
Or my
easy.
mom died, and all of a sudden, my
Yeah.
mind is completely somewhere else, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I've had situations where I've had follow-up phone calls from people in sales where it's
Hmm.
like, oh, sorry, like we had a major business disruption, and now we're completely focused on something else. And it's like, yeah, well,
Yeah.
okay. That makes
100%.
sense, right? Yeah,
But I think, especially in dating and probably sometimes in sales, people tend to take things more personally than they should. And that's not to say, we've talked about this, Peter, that's not to say that you shouldn't still feel that hurt and,
yeah,
make your way through it. But like those feelings are still valid, but just know
totally,
it's not you. There's nothing wrong with you. Or maybe there is, and you
totally.
should do some reflection. But
Sure,
I would say
sure.
80% of the time, it's not
It's
you.
it's really not. Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, again, I mean, hopefully it's not a nasty breakup with very bad, like, very complicated situations can be many, many different things, right? But yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And so, I mean, I think, again, you have to have tough skin in sales, and I think you have to have tough skin in dating, right? But be true to yourself, and fundamentally, the world will deliver what you're looking for always.
Absolutely. I think I like that as a little cornerstone for our episode. Is there anything else you would like to share with the people on sales, Peter, as we wrap this up?
Let me think about it. No, I think that kind of covers my thoughts. It's a grind. And I guess what I'll say is back to your concept of instant gratification. Sales has both a lot of pain and a lot of suffering and a lot of hardness and a lot of instant gratification in terms of, I make a sale, it drives me forward, it keeps me excited. And I
Right.
think dating is the same. And it
Oh yeah.
doesn't always have to be the date or the long-term relationship. It could be, hey, they texted me back. I'm sure you've been there. I've been there. Oh my God, I got a text back.
Yeah.
Put a little heart emoji. Oh my God, right? Like, so, I think sales is similar, right? Like these little nuggets and pieces of information along the way. Actually, I'll just finish with this point, but I always know when somebody's gonna move forward in a sale when they start liking my stuff on LinkedIn, when they start engaging with my social media, when these are, like, again, little signals that you see. And I feel like probably similarly in the dating world, it's like, oh, they've just liked me on Facebook or Instagram or
Yeah.
whatever. They've just connected with me or whatever. Or geez, they've just, like, disconnected with me, right? So
Totally. Totally.
so so we're in this interesting world where we have all these interesting data points when it comes to sort of seeing where things are at.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Peter. That was a fun conversation.
That was a fun conversation.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Two Babies in a Business. To learn more, visit ciprcommunications.com or catch us on our socials at CIPRcoms.